Welcome to Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast, a podcast hosted by Marcelo Aevi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, and Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium. We aim to draw a map of the state of criminology across Europe through the words of contemporary criminologists. How is criminology defined and taught? Which are the main lines of research? Which are the main schools of thought in each country? These and many other questions are answered here by fellow researchers who share their vision on the development of criminology in their countries from its beginnings to the second decade of the 21st century. If you want to know and compare their stories, stay tuned.
Today we are interviewing Rosella Selmini. Professor Rosella Selmini is a previous president of the European Society of Criminology and has been active as a member of the editorial boards of several journals. She has been an associate editor of the European Journal of Criminology. This interview was conducted on the 16th of May 2023.
Good afternoon, Rosella Selmini, and welcome to Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast.
Welcome, Rosella Selmini. We are very pleased to have you here on our podcast today. Let me start by asking you the first question. First question is a very general one, which we ask everybody, and that is how you would define criminology as it exists now in Italy.
Good afternoon to you all, and thank you for inviting me to this interesting project, to contribute to this interesting project. Well, the first question is already a challenge for me. Defining criminology in Italy is really very complicated, in spite of the fact that actually Italy was a place that is considered to be the birthplace of criminology. So you would expect something very consolidated or very clear in terms of the development of the discipline. Actually, it's not like that. And so criminology today in Italy is a fragmented field that includes a lot of different perspectives, both in terms of different disciplines. So there are many political scientists working in criminology. There are scholars with sort of forensic clinical background. That is the original, actually, characteristic of Italian criminology, at least for many decades. And there are sociologists. There are particularly a lot of law experts, or criminal law experts, who are also teaching criminology. So it's a very fragmented discipline in terms of schools of thought, of types of approaches, of types of methodologies. So I'm struggling in giving you a clear definition. I would say that is an area approached in a very interdisciplinary way that tries to explain criminal behavior and the reaction to criminal behavior, but really in a very fragmented way.
Okay, and you mentioned all these different persons from different disciplines, sociology, law, and how this is organized in terms of teaching. Is it you have masters or diplomas, or is are just courses?
Okay, this fragmentation is replicated in the institution, within the institutions. We don't have any department of criminology defined as it is. So criminology is taught in different departments, in a variety of departments. It could be even medicine, as I mentioned. It could be political sciences or sociology. Very often is law. I am a professor in a law department, even if I also teach in the political science department in Bologna. You can find criminology in psychology department, and I think this is actually the institutional configuration. The other interesting thing is that you have some few masters in criminology, but we only have one PhD program in criminology that was started by Ernesto Savona in Trento already at least 20 or more years ago, and is the only PhD who had the title Criminology. Other people who define themselves as criminologists might have a PhD in sociology or in law, in criminal law, or in psychology. So the fragmentation is definitively replicated at an institutional level. And the level of institutionalization is very low because there are no specific programs that really can, that a student can really start to attend and have a first degree and then a master and then enter in a PhD program. So careers are very fragmented as well, very different. There are some few universities offering a 3 years program in criminology with that definition. There are several masters, many of them use also different definitions, not just criminology, but could be criminal justice or psychology again, etc. So it's very, very mixed with other disciplines. Criminology never got the status of a specific discipline entitled to have a specific department or specific programs at the university level. And I think this says something important about the history of criminology in Italy, of course. The fragmentation and the institutional and the difficulties in institutionalizing the study of criminology. And I think there are several explanations for that, but maybe we might explore this explanation while we keep talking.
Yes, of course. Please go ahead.
Yes. So there is one reason that is how the Italian system is organized in terms of discipline. I think this is really unique Italian. Our university system is organized in different macro sectors, and within each sector there are subcategories of discipline. For example, sociology is a macro sector, and then within there are 7 or 8 or 10 different subsectors. Actually, many criminologists are included in this subsector that is defined as not criminology. It's defined as sociology of the law, deviance, and social change. So I am officially a professor of sociology of law, deviance, and social change. When I use the definition professor of criminology, I'm using something that officially, institutionally, does not exist in Italy. And many of criminologists today are included in this scientific disciplinary sector that has a huge importance in terms of habilitation. You mentioned habilitation. You can get habilitation deciding in which sector you want to work. If you have an habilitation in other sociological subsector or in general sociology, you cannot usually teach criminology or other. So it's at the same time fragmented and very constrained within these different disciplinary areas. Other criminologists are included in the sector of medicine, as I was just telling you, and particularly in legal medicine. That's the history of Italian criminology, actually. Finally, others are in psychology and in law. In law, you can find many professors of criminal law who are teaching criminology. I was just looking to the CV of a young Italian researcher who was in Leiden and who works on prison. He does because he just published a very interesting book with with an introduction by Shad Maroon. His name is Adriano Marzuppi, and he's an expert in prison and criminal policies. And I discovered that he's teaching criminology in a law school in Pavia now. He came back to Italy. So even when you want to find a colleague, you have to figure out in which department, in which sector, etc. I mean, it has a lot of influence about the careers, for instance, because if you want to get the habilitation for the 2 levels of professorship in Italy, you need to have published in journals that are listed by the government as consistent with your sector. So if I publish something in a political science journal, even if the content is criminological, it would not be useful for my curriculum to get. So it's fragmentation and at the same time very much narrowing your possibilities to move around in the world. That's my impression. So I understand it's complicated. So I realize it's difficult to understand for someone who is not used to this system. I actually don't know if there is a similar system in other countries.
That's a good question. And with this division until now, I'm not sure we got a clear distinction as you are mentioned, because this also raises the kind of requirements vary a lot according to the discipline. Like, for example, for in medicine, the tradition of publishing is quite different than the tradition of publishing in sociology, for example, or in criminology. That's quite a challenge. There is also a particularity. You mentioned the PhD, but the national PhD programs are relatively new in Italy. By new, I mean 30 years. How did it work? There were no PhDs before. How was it?
There were no PhD until, I think, the end of the 80s.
Yeah.
Actually, when I got my degree, there were no PhD programs available in Italy. So I got my PhD at the European University Institute. That was the only institution, and it was not Italian, it was an institution of, even if it was based in Florence, it was the only institution in which there were 4 departments: law, political sciences, social and clinical sciences, economics, and history. And they were offering the PhD program. They still are, of course. And so at the time, several, not many, because it was very, very selective and competitive, some of us got their PhD, have been admitted there and got their PhD in this, or they went abroad, very few at the time, actually. Starting from the end of the 80s, I think that some few PhD program.
Yeah, I discovered this because in the front page of some, I was a couple of times I was jury in the PhD in criminology in Milano, and then I saw this 22nd annual cycle of criminology of a PhD, and I thought first it was only in criminology, but then I discovered asking that it was general, and it's hardly new outside, because with the tradition of Italy and you are in Bologna, and I mean the tradition of Bologna for hundreds of years, it's funny that the PhDs were not established.
No, they were not at all. Actually, you in the Italian university system, you still become a doctor with your dissertation after 4 or 5 years, depending on what is your program. So there was actually at the time no idea about the fact that it's only a PhD that gives you the title of doctor.
Exactly, and with the dissertation for the license or for the master. Yeah. Because the famous book by Umberto Eco, Come si fa una tesi di laurea, it's usually translated as how to write a PhD, but indeed he did it for the dissertation at the end of basic studies in university basic studies.
I have a degree in law, and at the time it was 4 years, plus the period for the final thesis. I did it. I worked on a project that implied a lot of research on historical documents in the historical archives, because I worked on trials on infanticide in 19th century Bologna. And my thesis could have been a PhD thesis now. It was 400 pages, 1 year of work, etc. So that was not so common, but nonetheless, those who were interested in doing research, and usually if you were interested in an academic career or in doing research, even in my time, and you didn't have a PhD, the opportunity to apply for a PhD, the thesis was the moment in which you could have actually pursue your interest in doing research.
Yeah. Okay, and that's a good hint to start talking about a little bit of research in criminology and how it is organized.
Yeah, I think already at the end of the 80s, when I was at the European University Institute, I think one of the first PhD programs started in Bologna, I think in political sciences. Anna Albatti del Frate was one of the first person who she got a PhD there, not criminology again, but on a criminological topic. She was one of the first person in Italy to get that PhD.
Yeah, and for research, I mean, we are interested also in the paradigms, and I don't want to give directions on it, but I think there has been a classic paradigm in Italy for. Oh, I mean, there have been different paradigms in different periods of time. But what do you think?
Exactly. So history is very important to answer to this question. Of course, the origins of Italian criminologies are definitively based on the principles and theories and methods of the positivist school. They remain very influential in Italian criminologies up to the Second World War, for sure. What's interesting is that after this, after Lombroso and Perry and Garofalo, etc., there were no other real criminologists who reached the same level of success and of international visibility as they did. After the 20s, because of the dictatorship, criminology declined in terms of a science. That was exactly the goal by Lombroso and Perry, to develop a science of crime. Actually, that stopped because the tradition of the more legal thinking, or the more philosophical armchair type of studies on crime became prominent during the fascist period. Of course, a dictatorship during the dictatorship, everything that could imply any attack or towards the status quo, or any effort to explain a social phenomena was very seriously prohibited, almost. That's the same problem. Also, sociologists had the same problem during the dictatorship, and this is one of the main reasons why criminology never developed seriously and in an established way, I think, in Italy. So after the dictatorship, these were legal or medical traditions that had been able to survive during the dictatorship remain the most important approaches to criminology. So the idea that crime, for the legal, forensic, etc., crime was mostly a pathological behavior that you had to study with psychological approaches or even psychiatric approaches was very well established in the Italian criminologists. And nothing particularly strong from the empirical point of view, but just small clinical studies on small samples of offenders. That was the type of research available, starting from the Second World War, and till now, there is still a strong tradition of work in what we define as forensic criminology. I don't know if it's clear, the concept. I think it is, actually. This is one component of Italian contemporary criminology still, and they remain very, very strong. At the same time, as I was just mentioning, all the studies of several experts of criminal law and criminal policy started to develop an interest toward the reaction to crime and the functioning of the criminal justice system, particularly prison. And this was the group based in Bologna, the famous penal school or criminal law school in Bologna, where Massimo Pavarini was based, Dario Melozzi as well, even if then he went abroad to the US very, very quickly. And another group of criminal law experts whose interests were legal, where their way of thinking was mostly, of course, in terms of legal institutions and reforming the criminal justice system using legal methods and legal reform. But nonetheless, sometimes their studies were borderline with more sociological studies on the criminal justice system. We could consider these scholars also as the fathers or mothers of what we define today as the Italian critical criminology, that is becoming very, very strong. And that now includes, is very interdisciplinary. It includes sociologists, political scientists that I was mentioning. All of them are characterized by this very critical approach toward the institution of the criminal justice system. Actually, they work a lot on prison, on detention center, so their approach is mostly based on the idea that crime is almost exclusively the result of a social reaction to crime. And this is another important component of Italian criminology. So we have this clinical forensic, we have now the critical criminologies that develop from the studies of Massimo Pavarini and Dario Melozzi. And in between, there are outsiders, as me, and some others who have never felt comfortable neither with the clinical approach nor with the critical approach. So there is a smaller group of other scholars who are working or who are trying to work without having this narrow constraints. It's not easy because it's a very conflicted, not just fragmented, it's also a very conflicted world. So if you are considered to be part of a clan or a family, you cannot betray your group and start to work on something that is from one side and another. And that these two souls of Italian criminology actually do not communicate very much. Exceptionally, there have been some common projects, but really very, very occasionally. Pardon?
Is this still the case today? Because that was, of course, in many countries the case in the 1970s, but I was surprised to hear that it's still some kind of war between schools going on.
It's still the same. It's still the same. It's still pretty much the same. I was surprised also. When I came back from the US, I didn't stay away for very long. It was about 6 or 7 years, but I expected that the world would have changed a little bit in Italy. Actually, what I discovered is that it is still like that. maybe even stronger. The younger generation of critical criminologists are even more close in their own world than their fathers or mothers were. I mean, Massimo Pavarini, Dario Melossi, Chalmers Fitch, etc., they had a very clear idea about the fact that crime was mostly the result of the reaction of the criminal justice system, as I said before. But they were, I think, intellectually more open and more interested in exploring differences. Now, the younger generation, I don't think they are so much. Think of for instance, of the annual conferences of the Italian Society of Criminology. The Italian Society of Criminology is considered to be related to the psychopathological or forensic or clinical medical approach. It's not entirely true, but it's true that it comes from that type of approach to criminology. And so very rarely you can find those who would self-define as critical criminologists attending these meetings. At the same time, it's not, since there is anything, there is not an official group of critical criminologists in Italy, so there are no Italian conferences of the Italian critical criminology. Usually what they do is to attend the European group for the study of deviance and social control. And where you almost never can find Italian criminologists from the more clinical so it's still a very separate world. But there are several persons, as I told you, outsider like me, Roberto Cornelli, many others, not such a small group. I'm wrong in saying that it's a small group. And some others who really move in this world more freely. I don't have any connection with the paradigms, you mentioned paradigms or theoretical approaches, etc. Of course, I don't have anything to do with the clinical forensic because that's not my specialization. Actually, when I took the exam in criminology in Bologna in 1985, something like that, and I had to study 100 psychiatric reports about me. It was a nightmare. So I didn't really like that approach. I don't have the categories and the skills and the methodology to do that kind of work. And I'm not interested in crime as a pathology, but at the same time, I'm not only interested in crime as the result of social reactions. So I would like to explore different ways to study crime, criminal behavior, and the reaction to criminal behavior, not feeling constrained within one or another approach. Even if my approach is very often critical in terms of analyzing critically the functioning of the criminal justice system or some crime phenomenon. Another important aspect that I would like to add is that in any case, what is very rare in Italy is to find very good empirically grounded studies. So when I'm saying that there are sociologists working in the field of criminology, doing studies on crime or prison or etc., actually, in most cases, this is I think is very unfortunate, but it's not just the responsibility of the scholars, it's the system that is set up in a way that really does not allow to do good empirical work. Most of the time, the studies on prison or the criminal justice system are just a reconstruction of the opinions of the person who is writing about what the prison is or what it should be. Very rarely it's based on empirical data. I mean, we don't have very much empirical studies in any field. And I'd say it's not just the responsibility of the scholars, some of which are actually not so good in doing empirical studies because they don't have strong methodological skills, etc. But nonetheless, it's also the system that is really very, very resistant to provide good data, to provide access to do research on the field, At the moment, I'm working on a research on women in police in Italy, and I'm really getting crazy. I received by the Minister of the Interior a letter saying that I cannot interview female police officers. So I'm now working only on quantitative data that I've been able to find, but very descriptive, and there is no way to do observation within institutions. And also working in prison is really very difficult as a scholar. Sometimes some NGOs enter in prison and they may have contact, but these are NGOs, not researchers. So this is I think you also mentioned the most important challenges. This is probably the most important one. And I'm surprised. I have now, after 30 or more years working in this field, having the same problems that I was having when I was 25 or 30, and I was trying to do some kind of research on the field in this country. This is impressive. I mean, it's really an example of backwardness that is intolerable in a European country.
Do you think that this could be related to this tradition of being very critical against the criminal justice system and its institutions and how they work, and this put these institutions on their guard, being skeptical about what can go out from this?
I think this is an historical result of the development of Italian institutions that is much related still to the dictatorship, the fact that within some institutions, with the exception of the judicial bodies that has been completely renewed in the 80s and 90s, with that exception, other Italian institutions, particularly the Minister of the Interior, are very backward and closed institutions. I had the same experience of finding all these difficulties and challenges when I was not only a researcher, when I was also I was working at the regional government. So the cooperation with the institution of the Minister of the Interior has always been extremely difficult, and is part of their institutional culture. They are really so much worried about the fact that you can find out that there is something not working well, or strong resistance, particularly for what concerns the police. I mean, I know this is a problem in every country, so police is paid a lot of attention not to be criticized, not to be on the media, not to be discussed in research, etc. But nonetheless, they are more accountable in general, not only towards research. So Italian police is not accountable toward the citizen as well, as it is not toward the researchers. So there is not something as simple as crime mapping available in Italy for it. So I think it's something much more stronger and institutionalized in the professional culture of the bureaucrats and the policemen and several politicians also.
So the general distrust of academic scholars, basically,
Yes.
and in all kinds of institutions, that's very interesting. Because in other countries, for example, I'm thinking of the situation in Belgium, the police sometimes is really willing to collaborate when you do research that can help them, for example, identify problems in neighborhoods. Then they are willing to provide data. But on the other hand, if you want to do research on police misconduct and violence by the police, then of course they are very critical, and you cannot just conduct research and everything is being scrutinized before you can publish something. So it depends on the topic. But in general, there's still more openness. So this is a very huge challenge, I guess, for criminology.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge. You can have access to some data now through a sort of what's the English name of this? It's FOIA. You know what I mean? Access to public data.
Yeah.
When you're sent, okay. So there is a similar system. So you might have some access to quantitative data. I use that system for some research, including research on the police, but only quantitative data. So you can get the total number of carabinieri and how they are distributed across the regions and how many male and female officers, but nothing else. So you can reach some kind of quantitative data now, even if it's still very difficult. For other types of research, particularly for more qualitative types of research, interviews and observation or other kind of cooperations is still very, very complicated in a way that I never experienced in other countries, or I never heard by colleagues of other countries, even if I know that there are challenges in working in this field.
It's interesting because you mentioned that these are practical structural causes, and it's funny how the development of the science, as you mentioned, leads in different directions. For example, in Switzerland, we are in what is now called a School of Criminal Sciences that was born as an Institute of Forensics Photography, created by Rice in 1909. And then it became an Institute of Scientific Police, as it was called, which in other countries is Forensic Sciences, but the word was that one. And then criminology was added in the 50s, and since the 80s, there is this, now it's a master program, before it was called a different kind of postgraduate program, which means that you have the criminologist and the forensic scientist sharing at least some classes. When we were a small institution, we share much more classes. When I was a student, we were 3 criminologists and 9 in forensic sciences. Now I have more than 50 in the first year of criminology and 250 in forensic science. But this creates links, and then currently in all the police corps in Switzerland, we have former students, and so very often they ask us for help. Not only they hire the forensic scientists that have their own bachelor and master and PhD, but also they ask for help from the criminologists for specific topics that they want to study, because we show a very evidence-based criminology, what can be done here, there, and many times they ask for help, which I realize is not the case. You know that I was also in Spain for several years. In Spain, it's a little bit more similar to what the situation that you describe in Italy.
So I think this really is something related to the history of these southern countries, in which institutions have always been resistant to be accountable towards citizens. Is part of the relationship between citizen and the state.
Yeah.
So it's something wider than just being resistant to give information to some kind of critical or radical criminologists.
Yeah.
Of course, in those cases, maybe they are even more resistant, but that's not really the point, because I experienced that resistance in many different roles in my life as a citizen as well. So,
no, it's very interesting. This southern style. You know, the first time I went to the Council of Europe in 1996, I met someone from the Council of Europe who was there, and I told him that this must be incredible to be here with all these cultures and seeing how it works in different countries, from people from different countries. And he told me, it's terrible, Marcelo, because you realize that all the stereotypes are true. He struck me with that. And of course, it's not true, but it's true that there are some cultural common factors across countries. But here you can tell us. Yeah, tell me.
Yes, but I would have expected that these things would have changed in Italy. I mean, our dictatorship ended 12 years ago. I mean, Spain is had a much more recent transition to democracy. So you can understand, even if there are still some institutional resistances, but in Italy it's really too long. I mean, so probably there is also something else. That means the backwardness of other institutions, including the university. The Italian university are really changing a lot, or trying to change, but they are still in the middle of the old world and the new world. So, but no, please keep talking. You were saying something.
No, because you are one of the few criminologists that also was doing criminal policy at the level of the region, and I know that it was very different when you had the keys to who could do research. But perhaps you could explain us a little bit that role that you played for many years.
Yes, it was almost 18 years actually. So no, that's a very interesting. I think that experience that is based on my personal life, that is connected to my personal life, but at the same time had a lot to do with also with some changes that occurred in Italian criminology, because this governmental research center was organized at the very beginning, in particular in doing research on crime and related subjects. The idea was based on the political intuition of the president of the regional government at the time, who then became a national politician. He had this political intuition that fear of crime and incivilities and disorders, for the first time we started to use these new words, would have become an important concern, and they would have become topics extremely important in the political agendas. And he was not a right-wing politician, actually. He was a center-left politician, but he had this intuition, and he decided to create a group to use, to fund and to give money to a group to do research, first of all. And so a group of about 15 among sociologists, political scientists, statisticians, etc., was established. At the time, I was the youngest person in this group. And so I started to cooperate with these much more senior than I was scholars who were doing research for the regional government on a variety of topics. We started to do, first of all, analysis of crime trends that no one has ever done before in Italy, or almost never, in very few studies. We started to work on surveys. We also cooperated with the National Institute of Statistics, that at the time was launching the first wave of the national victimization survey. And we had our regional victimization surveys that was replicated the national one, going in depth into the regional area. So that was a wonderful experience for a young researcher, because I had the opportunity to work with some very good academics like Matthew Barbai, who was a good quantitative person doing a lot of interesting quantitative studies. Other sociologists doing more qualitative works like Antonio Roversi on violence. He was working on violence and on other social issues like homelessness. There were a couple of scholars working on police. One of them was coming from the European University Institute. So that was a very interesting period from a personal point of view, but also for the history of the criminological disciplines in Italy. Because, for instance, we did some type of research that had never been done in the university. Surveys, designing surveys, and conducting surveys, etc., requires money, a lot of money. And the team and the regional government, we became not huge, but at the end we were about 20 people. Some of them only had was the administrative staff, but others were researchers or younger researchers, etc. So we had the resources to do empirical research, despite all the problems that I was saying you have in doing empirical research in Italy, that in the university was really, really uncommon. So that implied, however, an improvement and created an interest. And I mean, this group at the regional government became a point of reference for the academia as well around criminological subject. Of course, our concerns were more related to crime trends, victimization, fear of crime. These were the main topics. But we also worked on juvenile delinquency. We did an empirical youth study at the regional level based on self-report, on a self-report service on young second generation of migrants. That was already 1999 or the beginning of 2000. So a lot of innovation in terms, particularly of the use of methodologies that had never been used before. And so it contributed, I think, a lot to the improvement to the improvement of the knowledge on criminological issues in the country. And as you probably know, the National Victimization Service in Italy is one of the best, I think, at the European level in terms of the sample that is huge. It's 50,000 households. In terms of how the questionnaire is designed, etc. And there are now, I don't remember exactly, I think 5 ways. So there is an historical trend that could be analyzed. But once again, it's very difficult to find. In this case, I think the responsibility is more on the side of the researchers. Researchers interested in working with this data, because the National Institute of Statistics is very differently from the Minister of the Interior, is much more open in cooperating with university, with the scholars and researchers, etc. But nonetheless, sometimes I wonder why we don't have a lot of articles published also in international journals on the wonderful data that are available from our victimization surveys. I mean, I'm not a strong quantitative person at all, so I don't have the capacity, if I'm not supported by someone else, to do good quantitative studies. But I wonder why others don't. Even some few people who work in this field, like Marco Barbagli, he's retired, but there was no one who continued in that tradition very seriously. Just a personal example that I think can illuminate again this scenario that I'm describing. At the beginning of February this year, I raised some money to give a postdoc fellowship to do an analysis of crime trends in Italy. I did that 5 or 7 years ago with another project, but I wanted to update that research and doing something. So I raised the money, I opened the call, and I got 2 applicants.
Only 2?
Only 2, all of them older than 50s, who had done different kind of statistical work. Actually not the right person to be selected for the job that I had. Probably they had the technical skill, but nothing to do with. And anyway, the one who was finally selected was not a perfect choice, but okay, resigned a few weeks after. I couldn't open the call again because of bureaucratic problems. I was going to lose the money that I got. So I lost the possibility of doing an empirical research on crime trends in Italy. And this is just one example that gives you the idea probably many young students or attending masters or thinking about doing the PhD, think of criminology as like CSI or something very critical like fighting against the prison system and abolish the prison. And none of these young students can think of a different way to be a criminologist and to do criminological research, because we really, and I wrote to a lot of people saying, I'm opening this call, please, if you have, tell your students to apply if you have young postdoc interested, etc. And also the system, the university system is very bureaucratic, so when you find some money, you have very strong limits about when you can use that money for what, etc. This makes things even more complicated. But the real problem is the cultural attitudes towards studies in criminology that still needs a lot of improvement.
Yeah, but I mean, everything that you mentioned now is extremely interesting, because I know the research. We didn't mention the region. The region is Emilia-Romagna for our listeners, where Bologna is, where other very well-known cities of Italy are. I'm not going to make an enumeration because I will forget one or another or make a mistake. But you did a lot of research which was published mainly in Italian, because these were reports. Huh?
Yes.
And have they been digitalized? Is it easy? Because it's a lot of work, I know, but I don't know if it is easy to access all that.
Yeah, it's available on the website of the regional government, all the publication, and we had something like 40 or 45 reports on different subjects from 1994 to 2010, probably. Now there are some few publications, but less than there used to be. And they have been all pages. I can send you the link. But please. Yes, everything is in Italian.
Yeah, but then we will put it on the description of the interview so that readers can go there. Because, for example, I think a nice project would be a kind of book with a summary of these results, at least in English, you know, at least an overview, because it's a huge work that was done. And what happened with that institution? Is it with that group? Is still working?
The group is still working. At some point, of course, the political interest was still strong, but much more oriented toward not doing so much research. But of course, our studies were always policy oriented. But nonetheless, we had a lot of independence in doing our work. So if we were suggesting the politician, oh, there is this subject that we think would be important, youth gangs, we would like to develop, they were always very open to explore new subjects without giving us any kind, at least at the time when I was working. Mm-hmm. You know, we organized the conference of the European Society of Criminology exactly because the politicians at the time were interested in having an European audience and in bringing to Bologna hundreds and hundreds of criminologists, even if that was not really their main mission. I mean, it would have been a mission of the university, but was the regional government that started the process to realize that. So but that approach changed over the years.
We must mention that it was 2007.
2007, yes.
It was a huge success, that conference, and that changed after.
Yes, already in 2010 and 11. I mean, there was, of course, the austerity period for local governments was a very hard period. So a lot of budget cuts that implied that your possibility to do research on a large scale, as we were used to do, diminished a lot. We also had a lot of cooperation with the universities, particularly universities of the regional area, with whom we could sign agreements to do research together. We supported a lot of young researchers in that way, that then have been able to start an academic career, but who were also working with us. And occasionally with other universities, we had a lot of cooperation with Transcrime by Ernesto Savona and other groups in Europe. So But then gradually all that disappeared because less money, some changes in the composition of the political elite of the regional government, less interested, less open, and much more oriented toward giving quick responses to citizens, CCTV, situational crime prevention, and much more oriented on offering responses than doing research on the problem. So that's the common trend everywhere in the world. Politicians became more and more oriented toward this kind of approach that does not imply, that does not take into account research as seriously as they used to do in New Zealand. So the group remained. They still had a budget to support the crime prevention program because that was the most important goal of the group, doing research and then funding local projects oriented to crime prevention. There are still several projects going on, including social and community crime prevention, but research is very much compressed now. I think they are still tracking the crime trends, but they are, for instance, no more doing surveys on fear of crime because there is no enough money to do this kind of thing. And the regional governments have been affected a lot by the austerity policies in the public sector, starting from 2008 and 9 after the 2008 recession. And they never recovered from that. And now it's possible. I mean, there is no money to have the health regional system working. So, of course, research on crime is getting very low in the priorities of politicians.
Yeah, it's a pity. And it's quite impressive to know that all this research was done and maybe did not receive the attention that it deserved, because I know some of these studies and they are quite interesting. And when you compare with the UK, where everything was published, of course there's the language, but everybody was looking there, and the realities are quite different, I think, in UK cities compared to, while the Italian cities are not that far away from other cities in Europe. So it's incredible. And about the victimization survey, there is also a tradition in Italy of doing regional research. So that also explains that huge number of persons or households being interviewed. This data are available. People could take it and do research with that.
The data about the region of Emilia-Romagna are available. We did a survey that, from the victimization point of view, I think it was very weak because the regional sample was lower, but it's mostly a survey on fear of crime and feelings of insecurity.
Yeah.
But for some few years, we did an in-depth victimization survey as well, only for 2 years. These are available and have been published in this report of Città Sicure. There are other reports by Transcrime. Transcrime also was working with regional governments and municipalities in Trentino and Veneto, and they have reports. I don't know if they are still on their websites, but they used to do also surveys, maybe not victimization surveys, still surveys on fear of crime and feelings of insecurity. But there were some regional, and I think there was something else, some other regions, but not in a systematic way.
Yeah.
They carried on some either victimization or surveys on fear of crime. The city of Bologna also, for a couple of years, did a local victimization survey that Gianguido was in charge of before coming to work at the regional government.
Yeah.
So there are some few not systematic local surveys. I don't know.
But also the national, no? There is also
the national.
Yeah, which is quite impressive. But I don't know if these data are available. If you can get, this is the National Institute of Statistics data that does this.
These are available. If you write to the National Institute of Statistics or if you go on the website, you can find all the original database, and the statisticians working there are incredibly helpful in helping you in moving in the website. I'm working now on some data on juvenile delinquency. In this case, it's not from the victimization survey, but official data, crime reported to the police. And they've been very helpful in pointing us in the right direction in the website where to find what we wanted to find. So the data in the cases of the National Institute of Statistics for what concerned data on reported crime, official and victimization data are, I think, pretty good, easily available. But in this case, as I was studying before, there is no interest from researchers in exploring these databases. And maybe there are not even the technical skills to work with that. I mean, there are wonderful methodologists and quantitative persons, but they work with different databases, family or sociology of work or something else, but not on crime data.
Yeah, it's quite impressive that having the data there, when you compare with the British crime survey, well, now it's not British, but England and Wales, Northern Ireland, Scottish crime survey, they publish so many things with that data, and this is not done. And I mean, there are a lot of possibilities, and it's difficult to understand what happened. And then maybe one thing, because you're also a comparative criminologist, as you had a part of your career in the United States. If you had to make, I know it's a very large question I'm asking, but in general, the main differences that you found while working, teaching in the US and in Italy, what are these differences mainly?
First one is for what concerns research. For what concerns research is how important from a cultural broader cultural point of view, research is taken into consideration in the US compared to Italy. I am not only referring to the interest of governments or politicians that we know is very low also in the US. The cooperation with research is very little. But in terms of the value of doing research, of understanding social problems, I had the feeling that in the US, this is considered to be a priority, even if then maybe governments who are not really taking into consideration the result of that research, but the idea that you have to do research in order to develop your policies was much stronger, and the fact that the research was much more was considered much more important at the point that there is much more money to do research. That's a very simple indicator. I mean, you can find money in private foundations in different sectors of the society, or etc. It was much easier to find support to do research. But I think it's related to the fact that research is something really important. While in Italy, it's not just, that's the biggest problem. I mentioned the institutional resistance and backwardness. But broadly speaking, research is not so much evaluated, particularly in clinical research. There is an historical tradition of being mostly philosophers or legal thinkers, or that still is created barriers in understanding that we need money if we need to do research on the field, or if we need to do huge surveys at the national level, etc. And so this is not considered a priority, neither in the government and probably also in the broader culture of the country.
Yeah. It's funny because you've been to the School of Criminology in Lausanne, and maybe I show you in one of the bureaus of the research assistants, there is a quote by Uberto Gatti, who said, I think maybe in the conference in Bologna 2007, or maybe in the class he was teaching, And he said, the first research problem I had was that I didn't have money to do the research. And someone wrote it down, and we have it there, and it's exactly what you're mentioning, because the networks, you have them, but yes, finding the funds is complicated. Maybe it's through Europe. Some universities do it mainly through European projects.
Yes, yes. Many European Italian universities are raising money in that way, and that's a way to try to find money, but it takes time. It's not so easy. At the national level, there are programs funding research in the university. What we define as PRIN, PRIN, that is something like national support for research, etc. Once again, I'm using the personal experience to illuminate the case. I applied for 2 of these national programs. One was March 2022. The other one was more recent, 6 months ago or something. The one for which I applied in 2022, we don't have the results yet. We don't know if we got the money or not. The process is not being completed. It's more than 1 year. People are waiting more than 1 year to know if they will have that money or not. And this then relates to the fact that careers of younger researchers are connected to your possibility of raising money. And so, for instance, I know there are some people, younger researchers, waiting to know if I will got that big money from the national government or not, because their career is related to that. And so they've been waiting for 1 year and 3 months. In the meanwhile, they have to leave. They have to do their things. And so everything is so slow in this country. And it's even slower than when when I was young, I had the impression that things were going much better. So the economic crisis, the political changes, of course, had an importance, even if this, of course, is a situation that comes from very far. So a lot of circumstances that probably are making working in research in Italy even more difficult than it was in the past. I realize I'm very negative, but is that I would have expected coming back from the US to find a much more. But there are, of course, possibilities. Of course, you can organize something, and sometimes you find money, but there is not a structured, systematic way to improve research. It's particularly in criminology that despite the interest of students, my classes in criminology are incredibly popular. There are a lot of students who want it because we know they watch TV series and etc. But criminology is not among the priorities of a department of legal sciences.
Yeah. No, but you're not being negative. You're just mentioning facts, and someone said facts don't care about your feelings. They are there. But there is also a tradition of Italian criminologists abroad. You were one, now you're back, but I'm thinking of Federico Varese in England, Letizia Paoli in Belgium, Stefano Canepele in Switzerland, and I could continue because there are many more. And this also tells something, no, about what's going on. What do you think?
Yeah, but most of many of these younger researchers are traveling abroad exactly because I'm sure they share the concern about the backwardness of this environment, the difficulties in having structured careers. Mine was very unconventional because I moved back and forth from the academic world then. So, but I'm really I'm really unique in this environment. Actually, it's much more common to wait 5 or 10 years to have your first well-structured, not completely established position, and then gradually it's unbelievable that you have to wait until you are 35 or 40, when in other countries at that age you are already at least an associate professor, while here you are still a postdoc or just an assistant professor. So, I perfectly understand that younger um, researchers want to, but not just in criminology. That's common I don't know the numbers, but I know that there are so many Italians working abroad. When I was in Minneapolis, there was an Italian woman from Bologna. She's a physics, so she works in hard sciences. I mean, she's becoming the sort of international star, but she left Italy after 3 years. She was working in Sicily with a postdoc, a grant 20 years ago or so, and she moved to the US, where she became in a few years a real star. I mean, I won't be surprised if sometimes she will win some kind of international important award or something like that. It's understandable. The careers are unclear and implied a lot of years waiting to understand what your people will do. That's not intolerable. I mean, money to do research is scarce, and you have to fight against bureaucratic constraints. Doing research is difficult because of the resistance of the institutions, and so it's perfectly understandable that many young Italian scholars want to go to more abroad.
Yeah. And but perhaps just to close the chapter on this research and related to criminal policy, I remember that there was this project Città Sicure, Secure Cities. So I have the impression that it had an impact on the criminal policies that were applied. Am I right?
At the local level. At the local level, that implied the development of many crime prevention projects. Some of them pretty big and actually very interesting examples in terms of, for instance, neighborhood that has been improved and completely renovated. Of course, those were kind of risk neighborhood with intervention that stem from social measures to improvement of police control. So very kind of big integrated crime prevention programs, but only at the local level, at the regional level. I mean, this was done mostly with the support of the regional government. So each city and even small municipalities could apply for money if their proposal was consistent with the research result that we had about the commission of crime and repression of crime in that specific area and the emergencies that we were working on, etc. So if they had a consistent project, they could get money and do different types of crime prevention schemes, including situational crime prevention, community crime prevention, etc. It worked very well for at least about 10 years. This connection between having the results about crime, the crime situation, or incivilities and disorder, and then developing a consistent project of intervention that would include citizen mobilization or urban renewal or a variety of different measures. So that went well, but it never became a national program. At some point, when the Minister of the Interior started to be interested in these issues of incivilities and disorder at the local level, or even minor crime at the local level, the national government also started to fund some programs, but they limited this funding to CCTV programs. So it was their approach was much more limited, much more based on understandably the mentality of the Minister of the Interior. Their goal is control crime, and while at the regional level, of course, the goal was improve the social conditions of the citizen to improve the quality of life of communities. Those what the different institutional competencies of each institution, of course, influence the type of things that you would like to develop. So at the local level, a lot of interesting crime prevention programs have been developed for about 10 years. At the national level, much less and much more oriented to just to CCTV and control and police enforcement, law enforcement.
Yeah. Okay. So all this is extremely interesting, and one of the questions that we also like to ask to our guests, and you also mentioned how things change when during your lifetime, and it's related to this, to how. Let's start with how crime has changed during your life as a criminologist.
In quantitative terms, when I started to work as a young criminologist in the regional government, we were exactly, I think we were exactly an example of a high crime rate society. Italy could have been included in the group, in the government definition of high crime rate societies, because crime was going up, not only from the beginning of the 90s, but even earlier, as we started to find out doing more longitudinal studies. So, but at the time, in the 90s, actually, crime was, in quantitative terms, was definitively increasing. All types of crime, at the time, still also violent crime, including homicide, because we had several mafia conflicts that provoked some number of death. So then homicide started to decline, and in many other countries, but for Italy that was much more important because Italy had one of the highest, as you know, homicide rate in Europe, and it started to go down. But also the other types of property crime started to decline, particularly in robberies in the street. So not so much domestic burglary, that remained pretty high, and it was considered to be a sort of an emergency. Many crime prevention programs were based on prevention of domestic burglary. That remained pretty high until the first decade of 2000, but then it also declined. So the situation of Italy differed maybe more slowly and with some few differences from other countries, but is more or less following the same trend. So crime trend started to decline around 2010 and 12 or something like that. So maybe a little bit later than other countries, with some ups and downs for some crimes, particularly domestic burglary, as I said. But the general trend is toward the decline. This is the most important quantitative change that I really summarize it in a few words. Of course, it would require a more in-depth analysis, but this is the big picture. What's interesting is that in terms of fear of crime and moral panic, nothing has changed so much, actually. So we have interesting data from the National Institute of Statistics showing that feelings of insecurity and fear of crime in different ways are still high, even if not at the level of the 90s. So there's been a change as well in that, but it's still very high. National campaigns and initiatives are still using crime as the most important emergency in Italy, and this has been true in the last 15 years or so at the national level. So there is still a lot of interest in crime, and with new emergencies now, such as we have all this concern about what in Italy are defined as baby gangs. That's the definition that I don't know what it is. I think it's the creation by the media, baby gangs. And I think it's related to the fact that in Italy, we are used to think of gangs as something related to organized crime. So adult types of serious, strong organization very well structured. So this idea of groups of young kids meeting face to face in some areas of the cities and having some conflicts or involved in minor crimes or vandalism, etc., is considered to be minor, but at the same time they use the word gang. So this baby gang is the media construct that's very, very interesting. We are doing the research on that right now. So there are some emergencies coming out continuously. So in terms of the political relevance, the topic is still very, very important. In terms of quantitative data, crime, as I said, is going down. Fear of crime is not increasing, but it's sort of stable. There is a huge interest now in the public discourse, in the political discourse, but also in the civic society about gender violence. And it has been like that since already 10 or 15 years, particularly on female homicide, because differently from male homicide that went down a lot, female homicide is mostly stable in Italy, the same number of female homicide every year, so not big changes, as in some other countries where it's going down, but not as fast as male homicide. So this is, in very few words, the most important changes.
But it's a very good description of what happened. And also, I think it's interesting the difference that you made across different types of crimes, because homicide started decreasing in the 90s, but other crimes started decreasing 20 years later, after 2012, 10, 12. And in the literature, which comes mainly from English-speaking countries, US and UK, they had a different pattern, because most crimes, we can talk about cybercrime. Cybercrime is a different issue, and then we can talk later. But let's say offline crimes started to decrease in 1992. The problem is that many criminologists in the continent followed that logic. So I was hearing, I think a guy from Belgium, a police officer from Belgium, who said when it rains in the United States, some drops start falling in Europe. And so, yeah, everybody started talking about a crime drop. And then for homicide, it's good. And I know that in the States, homicide seems related to other offline crimes, but it's not really the case in Europe. And the decrease took place 20 years later. And sometimes it's ignored because people talk about an international decrease, and this is happening everywhere. And it was mainly in English-speaking countries, but you have monitored that in a very good way, I think. Someone is doing research on this cybercrime issue?
Yes, one of these Italian who came back who went to abroad. She was in Essex, and now she just came back a few months ago or a year ago. We have programs for people from abroad. And so she's now in the political sciences department in Bologna, where I also teach. Her name is Anita Lavorgna.
Yes, yeah.
Probably you know her. But
she won last year one of the awards of the European Society of Criminology.
She works on cybercrime, but I don't know if it depends on in the analysis of types of behaviors that I'm not sure about. The fact that she works with quantitative data in terms of crimes, but I'm sure she works on cybercrime a lot, and she's also teaching a class on that in Bologna.
Because these trends are very difficult to follow, to establish what was going on, and some research also indicates that people are. Some research in Finland shows that people are more scared. Fear of crime is higher for these kind of crimes than for classical crimes, which is logic when you think about the real risk.
Well, particularly during the pandemic and after. So
exactly. And for me, I think I would like to have one more question, but then maybe Lieven has something else. We talk about the change in crime and the change in the offenders known to the police or the ones who are in prisons. I know that you in prison is not your field, but I have also the impression that when you look at the things written by Italian criminologists in the 70s, for example, or early 80s, it's like a different kind of word that they are describing. They're talking about mainly about theft, and I have the impression that it's quite different nowadays. What do you think?
I mean, in terms, we don't know very much about the work. We have no research on sentencing, for instance, almost anything. And this is true. The data are difficult to find, that's true, but it's also not the research interest in Italy. I never really understood why, but as far as I know, I mean, the percentage of known offenders is about the same that it was 20 years ago. So 90% of property crimes are committed by unknown offenders. That was the percentage for the most common property crime. And I'm pretty sure this has not changed at all. So there has not been strong improvements in the police capacity to identify offenders or etc. So that's been the same. For what concerns risks, so there have not been strong improvement in this, and this should raise some questions about how the law enforcement system is working, etc. Considering that we have many more police than other countries per thousand inhabitants, so that should raise some issues. But the other aspect is that I don't know in terms of sentencing, how many convictions, etc. But as you know, for what concerns prison, what you were mentioning at the beginning of this interview, the change in the composition is something that is probably known in Italy, and now I think 35-40%. But depending on I don't know that the national average, but it's immigrants, it's foreigners, mostly from Maghreb or from some Eastern European countries. And this is and mostly for drug offenses or property crimes. So this is the typical prison population in Italy in current times, which I think is not so different from other countries. What is changing in words is the deterioration of the prison system in Italy, with increasing numbers of suicides, police abuse. So maybe it's better investigated than it was once. Or maybe I'm saying something that is not completely correct. Maybe it was the same before. But actually, we have very good NGOs monitoring the functioning of the criminal justice system, of the prison, as I said at the beginning. So they have been existing for 15, 20 years, particularly I'm thinking of Antigone, who is the national NGOs working, and they work interesting reports on the prison system in Italy, almost very close to the level of scientific research, even if they are not in such group. And I think it's correct to say that the system is the overcrowding of prison is getting worse, that the condition within prison are getting worse as well, etc.
Yeah, I have the impression, the percentage of people for drug offenses and in Italy and in a few countries is quite high. We're publishing in a few days the space report, and you can see it. I have the impression that the police put the accent more on violent crimes, drug offenses, and it's like property offenses. You deal with that. You find an insurance. It's not like the main, and then this is reflected also in the composition of the prison population. But there's also a huge change, I think, in the composition of the Italian population, and also a lot of movement inside Europe. Also, I remember in Barcelona, someone told me the number of Italians, but it was several thousand.
It's the first foreigner community in Barcelona.
Yeah. So the profile of the European cities change, and this, of course, must be reflected also in the indicators that we have. But it is, it's quite different from the cities that were there in the 70s. So, Lieven, I don't know if there is something that we forgot to ask to Rosella.
No, but there's something I would like to additionally ask, because there's of course a lot of political debate on the migration crisis, and given the specific position of Italy. You mentioned the stability of the fear of crime rates. So is there no relationship at all to the changing situation of the global migration crisis? Is there any specific new trend or maybe a gap in research? I don't know.
Well, there is not much in recent years. There are not much information about that in recent years. I was talking about that just 2 days ago with Asher Colombo, who used to do a lot of studies on the relationship between migration and crime. And he also told me that most of the studies now are mostly concentrated on the detention center and on the borders and control of the borders. So once again, there are not strong empirical studies on this subject. One of the few articles that came out a few years ago by this he's an economist working at Rosetta. His name is Luigi Maria Solivetti, and he did good statistical analysis of the relationship between crime and migration, and in somehow intervening in the debate that has been ongoing between those who were arguing that there was actually a relation between migrants and crime, and that the presence of these migrants, and that the rate of crime committed by migrants was, compared to their presence in the population, was much higher. That's true. And in terms of because foreigners are, without considering those who are undocumented, that you cannot know how many they are. That's another big problem, that we are in calculating actually the right crime rate for migrants, but nonetheless they are about 10-12% of the population. But for some crimes they are overrepresented. So in this debate between this position and the other position, that is a matter of the social reaction, they are identified much more often. They are as a target of the law enforcement policies. They don't have the same protection from businesses that others have. They don't have with lawyers, so they are in prison much more open. All these two different. As usual, probably the truth is in the middle, putting together both these two things. And Luigi Maria Solivetti does this kind of approach, but taking the numbers and saying, look, it's true that migration has an influence in some crime rates, because there is no discussion that some crimes are predominantly committed by migrants. Of course, this is also the reason, and then if they are overrepresented also in prison, that might be also the consequence of the law enforcement agencies' attitudes toward the migrants. But nonetheless, the main issue is that there are no serious migration policies in Italy. So, and now with the crisis of the refugees and asylum seekers, etc., what's happening in Italy, the most recent numbers, Asher Colombo confirmed that, is that the numbers of people arriving is not increasing at all. Even if there are national campaigns talking about the invasion and, the debate about the boats crossing the Mediterranean Sea and the horrible things happening there, nonetheless, the numbers are much lower than they were years ago. But the topic remained at a national emergency, in a complete absence of forms of regulation or protection, because several systems have been cancelled by earlier governments, and they've never been at the local level to organize where these people can live, what they can do in the period in which they stay in Italy, waiting for some kind of status as refugees or asylum, or waiting to go in other European countries. That's the most important pattern of migration projects now in Italy. The vast majority of the people who is arriving does not want to remain in Italy, but they want to go in France or Germany or Sweden, where they have other families and other members of their families. So, but it's so badly managed in terms of policies that it gives the impression that it is phenomenon out of control, but in my opinion, is more a matter of very, very bad policies that have been worsened in the last few years, but they have never been very good in terms of how organizing the flows of migrants, how to organize the system at the local level and the national level to host them in inhumane conditions in the period when they are waiting for their future, etc. So, but the numbers are not going up at all.
Interesting to know that, but I think a lot of research is missing there. Also, victimization of immigrants, because they're a very poor population, deprived, so they're very vulnerable also for victimization, and there is no systematic research on it. So I think it's important to talk about this, to raise the awareness of such kind of research.
Yes, there is very little research also in terms of the differences among these groups of people, because in Italy, even researchers often talk about migration as just a unique phenomenon without taking into consideration that those coming from Africa have different needs and interests than those coming from Afghanistan or from other Asian countries or whatever. So it's really, research on migration, there are many, but mostly concentrated on analyzing the condition of detention, particularly in these administrative centers, which are these temporary places where these people are put, and criticizing the condition that, okay, it's perfectly okay, but there are no real migration studies in terms of the relation with crime. There are good migration studies in general, but not in relation to crime.
For the victimization, there is this EU MIDIS survey that was conducted now twice. I'm not sure that the second one is already published. We did an analysis of this with Lorena. We published it in English, but in the Spanish review of Criminology, which is online, because this is a very interesting survey conducted with the two main minorities in every country, also in Italy, because it's all the EU countries. I can send you the link later. Maybe we will put it also for the listeners. EU MIDIS, European Union MIDIS. MIDIS is an abbreviation of migration and something like that. And this is quite nice. It's interviews and shows that the levels of victimization are very high. And as far as I know, the second one was being conducted. I'm not sure if it has been published. EU MIDIS. I will send you.
But did you find Italian studies when doing this? Because I know studies about the victimization of foreigner women, of migrant women for gender crimes. There are some few studies of a demographer working on this kind of intersectional perspective, but with good quantitative analysis, because she has very strong technical skills in human. But I don't know if anything of any research in Italy about the victimization of migrants in.
No, apart from this, which is the analysis, there are country reports, let's say, for every country. The person who is doing this survey, one of the main researchers, Sami Nevala from Heuni.
Yes, I saw some other studies they did in the past. I think about victimization for violence, so for violent crimes. Yes,
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
But otherwise, I'm not aware. It's a delicate topic, and because there's a link with delinquents, and I think also the use of the word immigrant is many times confusing, because there are so different profiles, especially in Switzerland, for example. So you have people that are established in Switzerland, and usually when they make the distinction, according to the status of residence, there are no differences for the persons who are established and can have long-term plans. But of course, for other people who cannot establish themselves, because it's quite difficult to get a legal status in Europe if you're not from an EU country, this is a completely different situation. And also, especially Switzerland, that is in the middle of the crossroads, you also have a cross-border crime. So gangs entering just to commit what's typical with domestic burglary near the borders. And all this is treated like immigration and delinquency, and it is not.
No, I mean, in Italy it's also difficult because it's as it is in France, I guess, I think, I'm not sure, but or in other European countries, the Minister of the Interior does not give you the nationality. It's very difficult to find data distinguished by nationalities. We have been able once doing a special request to the Minister of the Interior, and we made it. That was 2015. But usually it's very, very difficult to, including when you ask the data to the National Institute of Statistics, they are very resistant to give the data by nationality. So that makes things even more complicated.
In Switzerland, there was a lot of pressure to have this data by nationalities, and it is being published because there's a huge debate. In Switzerland, in prisons, more than 70% of the inmates are non-nationals. So this is a huge debate. And so I'm trying, when we publish, for example, the Council of Europe Penal Statistics, just highlight these differences and avoid making confusions between the concept of immigration, I'm going to establish myself in this country, make my life there, and the general concept of foreigner, which, and in some countries, being an illegal immigrant is already a crime. So just being there is a crime. So this creates a lot of confusion, and hiding a little bit the data is not the solution either, because then the demagogical politicians and the populist politicians can say whatever they like because the data is not there. But it's a very delicate topic. Yeah,
I think we managed to have a very interesting discussion on all the topics we prepared. So I think we should just thank you very much, Rosella, for this very profound, interesting interview.
And we learned a lot, really. You mentioned so many things.
And consider that I am an outsider still in Italian criminology.
Yeah, but this is probably the best position.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
That really a lot of things that some of them I knew because I know you for many years, and we've been in the board of the European Society of Criminology and organizing the conference. So I had so many beautiful discussions. But I think for the listeners, there's a whole world of research in criminology that is outside of Italy is more or less unknown, and that's really a pity.
I hope it will be useful.
Yeah, it will be, and you will see. And I know that you use interviews with criminologists for your classes. So now you will be also a subject of study.
Yeah. In the US, I was using the interviews with Robert Merton and all the other criminals, but I stopped because my students after 10 minutes were all like that. Those interviews with the very bad sound, and very kind of, we are here to interview with this very low. So I think our European interviews are more lively, also because the technology allows now to have probably more interesting.
We can edit things.
This must be mentioned too, that you were the person that promoted the European Criminology Oral History Project of the European Society of Criminology, and these interviews are available on the website. You can go to the website of the European Society of Criminology to the YouTube channel of the European Society of Criminology. So, the first French, one of the first French movie, I think, was La Rosella Arrosée. So it's the guy who La Rosella is the one who is gardening, and it's a very short. It's not really a movie, but a short cut made by probably by the Lumiere brothers, and suddenly the water goes onto him, and so you, in this case, you were the promoter of these interviews, and now you're being interviewed. I would really like to thank you very much for all this.
Thank you.
Thank you, and have a nice day.
In Florence.
Yes, let's meet there. Thank you, Rosella.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you for following Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast. This podcast is edited by Eduardo Coco from the University of Lausanne. Our theme song is Seagull's Night, Noche de Gaviotas, composed by Gustavo Cantero, arranged by Tato Germano, and played by Tato and Gustavo with the voices of Sasha Conte and Alejandro Turco Gujot. Your host are Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium, and Marcelo Evi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Cheers, and see you soon.